secret chamber. It's a red room, it's a white room, weird chairs everywhere. I'm wearing shorts. Oh God, and I got all wet from the rain. Anyway, this is an interesting twist of topic because I want to talk about Game of Thrones. And I know I'm late to the Game of Thrones. Never was really a fan of it. Anyway, also, everybody on YouTube already used the opportunity to talk about Game of Thrones to garner hundreds of thousands or in some cases millions of views when the last season actually aired. I wanted to gather more thoughts before I actually ventured into an opinion, and I do have an opinion, but in a way my opinion will not be really on the show as much as it will be on the people talking about the show. And this is something that I think is not really a video that's been made yet. So as always in these cases, spoiler alert, I might say things about the show that you don't know yet because you haven't watched it. So you've been warned from here on out, it's spoiler territory. Okay, so first of all, Game of Thrones is a show I always avoided, never wanted to watch it. Just not to be one of those people that thinks, not to be snobby and say, oh, well, if the entire masses love it, it has to be something relatively flat and cheap. Not in terms of production value, but in terms of content value, cultural depth, Anyway, I did watch it. I began watching it a year and a half ago and went through it all at once, except, of course, for the last season, which I just finished watching a couple of weeks ago. So it was, to me, there was no real build-up, not year after year. I wasn't waiting years and years for I wasn't waiting a year for season 2 or another year for season 3, and so on and so forth. Anyway, this is all stuff you've heard. There's either the YouTubers that have been watching it from day one or the ones that have been watching it all at once. So all of this, just watch other videos about it. What I want to talk about is something else. I want to talk about how the reactions were to the last season, particularly the last 2 seasons, but let's just talk about the last season and how disappointed so many people were because the 2 writers were basically criticized for rushing it to the end. Many different theories as to why that was. HBO claims that they wanted more seasons. But the 2 dudes apparently, allegedly, just want to jump into Star Wars in their contract with Disney and just call it quits. I don't know. Even that's really not the point. The point is, yes, was it wrapped up quickly? Yeah, it was. But my issue is with, I don't know, who started it? Who was the first idiot who wrote the first article stating that the finale, the ending, the development of both storyline and characters towards the end, and here we get to it, wasn't earned. It wasn't earned. It wasn't earned. And then all the other lemmings catch on to that phrase, and everybody started copying it, and everybody started saying in all their videos, it wasn't earned. The finale wasn't earned. The ending wasn't earned. What does that even mean, people? This was a rhetoric question. Of course I know what that means. So anyway, you cannot expect something to end in the way that you perceive as being earned. You can't. You could go to a certain extent and say, but I'm paying subscription, I'm paying HBO, right? So I have also my expectations. And because I'm paying, I have a service and I'm really disappointed with how the show goes. Up to that point, yes, you could complain. But may I remind you that one of the reasons why this show in particular became so famous and popular was because it was so unpredictable. To me, it wasn't unpredictable at all. But whatever. So people were kind of, what was the shocker when the show first aired? was it was about main characters being killed off just like that, bam, and they're gone. You never knew in the upcoming episode who would be killed, for what reason, out of the blue, without a reason. It was all very random. But guess what, people? Life is random. There's only a handful of billionaire politicians that rule the world that get to really decide the fate of so many other people and things. But even they don't get to decide their own fate because, when it's their time to kick the bucket, they're going to kick the bucket. There's no way of avoiding that. But everything else in life is just, there is no earned. Nothing is earned. You can die like that tomorrow, hit by a car, hit by a bicycle even. People even die hit by bicycles. You could slip on a staircase and just die. The stupidest of reasons, and you're gone. People go crazy. All of a sudden they snap. Was there a build-up to Danny's craziness? Actually, there was. I mean, girl was a bitch not from day one, but from all the hurt that she kind of got in her life. It got to her. Eventually it got to her. So there you did have that build-up. Was it a quick death and was it a quick turnaround to becoming this crazy dictator? In the mass quantity of death that she produced in the last season, last episode in particular, or the one before the last, made her more of a villain. But she was a killer even before that. Her death, that moment, the build-up, it wasn't earned. Take that out of your vocabulary. It doesn't really belong. It doesn't fit at all into the context of this particular show. Quite frankly, also not in the context of a story that actually hasn't been written yet. The final books aren't there yet. So this is all just hypothetical speculation on a vision of a possible outcome without going too deep into all of the implications that main characters' choices have in the show and how the repercussions then kind of trickle down to smaller characters or storylines. This is about, I think, our society in general is being extremely spoiled. The whole world, more or less, not the entire world, but many countries get to see Game of Thrones or get to watch Game of Thrones. A lot of those countries are first world countries. A lot of those countries are not. But let's just say most of the people that make those YouTube videos complaining about a certain plot line or a certain ending not being earned, what do they know? You're so entitled. You have food on the table, warm food every day. You have so much positive out of life that you take for granted because you've had it all your life, and then you're upset because some TV show, some multi-billion product out there didn't end the way you wanted it to. I mean, it's the attitude that is really disgusting to me. There's more important things in life, and now you could, ping pong it back to me and say, wait, Dacob, but you're making a video about it too, so why aren't you, using your time in a more useful manner? Well, part of the reason why I do YouTube is also to analyze society and to create a social analysis and critique of society. And I do believe that Game of Thrones is a phenomenon, and also all of the subsequent creation of YouTube channels dedicated to Game of Thrones is a cultural and social phenomenon, and it deserves a commentary of some sort. Now, a lot of you are not going to agree with me. Some of you might. That's besides the point. The point is to trigger a certain thought process. I think a lot of the Game of Thrones reviewers watch other Game of Thrones reviewers, and kind of people influence each other. Similar thing happened when Twin Peaks was out, The Return, back in 2017. There was a huge production of review videos, of analysis videos out there. But it was a different type of time and a different type of analysis, because Twin Peaks kind of really goes more into the psyche of human beings in general, and it's on a timeless level. So the analysis was, yes, some YouTube channels would go into trying to understand why certain things from character A to character B happened and the explanation behind it. What did Lynch really want to say? But a lot of other channels did not really care about that. A lot of other channels were more dedicated or more interested in feeling it, feeling how Twin Peaks has become, or feeling how Twin Peaks represents the emotion of a time. And it's a very emotional show that shows emotions through abstraction. Totally different story from Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is visceral, it's crude. Somebody's horny, they have sex. Somebody is angry at somebody else, they kill them brutally without a blink of an eye. It's very 1 + 1 = 2. This is the strategy. This is what I want to obtain. The goal is to sit on the Iron Throne, or the goal is to manipulate who is sitting on the Iron Throne. Everybody has these agendas. And it seems as though the viewers of Game of Thrones had the biggest agenda of them all. And that agenda was to have it end the way that they wanted to end. But that's not how life is. And if we're to really follow how Game of Thrones taught us to perceive it, with not knowing who's going to die in the next episode, then such an ending as the one that the viewers were given didn't have to be earned. It's just a slap in the face, just like every other episode of Game of Thrones was. I think most of the frustration that stems from this particular ending of Game of Thrones, as coming from most of the viewers, I think it's connected more to the fact that Game of Thrones is over, rather than how it ended. So that kind of frustration of somebody watching it for so many seasons and then seeing it end, mixed with the fact that some of the characters did not get a redemption, some of the characters did not go towards the light, that mixed together is a poisonous mix. And this is where ultimately I do believe that the two writers, the showrunners as they call them, failed epically, because it shows me how the lack of professionalism, because that poisonous mix, which you should not mix together, they just seem to not have realized that that would actually mix together. Those two ingredients, you should never mix. And they just went for it. They didn't really care, I guess. But even that is fine. Even that is part of life. The way that John ends up walking, all the way up north, and he's with the wild people, and he's just going off, and we don't know what's going to happen next. And he's not the king. He's not the ruler. He's not on the Iron Throne. He's still a nobody like he was in the beginning. It just shows you something very particular and important, in my opinion. It shows you that how our society is built, it's almost impossible, no matter how much they sugarcoat it for you, it's almost impossible to break through the social status you were dropped into when you were born and raised, and to kind of switch them, to go into another status. Just the fact that there are different social stati or statuses is terrible. It's just not human. But that's how our society works. And ultimately, he ends up right where he began. And I think it's disconcerting because it takes away hope from a lot of people. To me, it actually brings hope. It brings hope because it kind of shows me that other people are aware of the fact that you can't really switch Some people manage, but it's a very tiny percentage compared to the entire population of the world. It's really hard to almost impossible to switch social status. But if you embrace where you're really coming from, and from within that apparatus, push forward your agenda, maybe, just maybe, you might have a chance at happiness in life. And by happiness, I don't mean prosperity and growth and riches that keep growing and accumulating. Happiness meant in the way of a modest existence where the needs that a human being has are met. A warm roof above your head, food on the table every night, family that loves you around you, wife or husband or kids or not kids or whatever, independent from your gender orientation, independent from all that bullshit that we're fed by society about what goes, what doesn't go, and put the church in it as well if you want. Just forget all that for a second. But the basic needs are important. And it's important that they be met. And that is literally love, food, shelter, and health. Health usually follows. If you have a comfortable home and you have that, the food, the healthy way to sustain yourself, and you have the love, usually that type of people live a long and healthy life. Of course, society is important. All the synapses, connections in our brain, it is kind of scientifically been studied that people that lead a more sociable life live longer. The ones that isolate themselves and communicate less with other people live shorter. So ultimately, the fact that John embraces his reality is it's just truth. It's very, in my opinion, very much so connected to the reality of the times that we're living in right now here. So, big reason why I just don't tolerate watching all of these reviews about Game of Thrones and the finale of Game of Thrones and how it was not earned. Nothing in terms of what life throws at us is earned. Nothing. A poor baby born from a poor family in a poor country where the colonialist West took over, how was that earned? How was that storyline or plot line earned? How? There's nothing fair about it. Nothing. That's just life. It sucks. It's terrible. And actually, this is like one of those memes, when they say like, you're blabbering but nobody's listening. So I don't care. I just want to state my opinion here. If it were up to me, I would have made it even more brutal, even more the finale of Game of Thrones. I would have made it even more unfair. I would have made it even more heartbreaking. I would have made it even more ruthless, tragic, dramatic, and in many ways even more senseless, because that's exactly how life is. Life is senseless. You're just in your loop, waking up in the morning, going to work every day, repeating and repetition, until one day you're just too old and you croak. That's life. There's no happy ending. There's maybe just moments of happiness throughout life, peaks of joy throughout all the depths and all the sadness in life. And those peaks are what make life worth living, but ultimately they too shall pass. And once they pass, stillness is what the aim of nature is in general. When we die, we are still. We finally find peace. And by peace, it's not necessarily being at peace with oneself, the soul, spirit, if there is such a thing, but it's about stillness, total silence and stillness. And that stillness, everything tends to stop. Throw a ball, it's going to move, then it's going to slowly stop, it's going to stop. Gravity keeps pulling us down. You can keep jumping when you're young, full of energy. You jump high, but then at a certain point the knees give in and you kind of jump lower, lower, lower. You just stillness. And that stillness, I think, is a virtue if one embraces it and manages to reach the peace of that stillness before one even dies. And part of reaching that peace is embracing life as it gets to you, as it's being thrown at you, or as it throws things at you. So, yes, the finale was earned because it's just the way it was. That was the finale. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is a very different type of video for me. Although I have made videos on movies and TV shows in the past, but catch my drift. For those of you who are here just for Game of Thrones, you're going to be shocked when you see my other videos, but whatever. And yes, I chose actively to wear Michael Myers' shirt because this is a very good example of representation of what is not earned, but actually is earned. Halloween is one of my favorite movies of all time, and Michael Myers in particular as a representation of nature / death. It's just cold-hearted, emotionless. It doesn't ask, it doesn't have empathy, it doesn't have sympathy. It's just what it is, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you like this video. If you have, please do thumb it up. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. And if you wish to, you can consider subscribing to my channel here on YouTube. I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And also on Patreon, Super Dacob, all spelled together. Love you all, see you soon, take care, and never give up on life.